What if history could be written without a single letter? What if memory itself was the archive? We often think of history as something found in dusty books, recorded with an alphabet. But for most of human history, and for countless cultures, knowledge wasn't stored on paper. Let's start by busting a huge myth: the idea of illiteracy. When we hear that word, we imagine someone who can't read or write. But that assumes writing only means alphabetic letters. That's a very specific and, frankly, a very European way of looking at it. The truth is, cultures all over the world developed brilliant, complex systems for recording information that had nothing to do with our ABCs. They weren't pre-literate or non-literate, they were just differently literate. For them, a knotted cord or a string of beads could hold as much information as a library. This wasn't a failure to invent writing. It was a different path of intellectual development, one that prioritized community, memory, and a tangible connection to the information being stored. They didn't need paper when their entire world was a library. Take the incredible civilization of the Maya in Mesoamerica. We often hear about their pyramids and calendars, but what about their books? Yes, books. They were called codices. The Maya had one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the ancient world, but it wasn't an alphabet. It was a flexible, powerful system that allowed them to write with nuance and detail. And what did they write about? Everything. They recorded detailed astronomical observations, tracking the movements of planets and stars with breathtaking accuracy. They documented their royal lineages, tracing their kings back through generations. They chronicled major historical events, from battles and alliances to royal ceremonies. When Spanish conquistadors arrived, they saw these beautifully illustrated codices, not as a library of priceless knowledge, but as heresy. They burned almost all of them, a catastrophic loss of history. Now, let's travel south to the Andes Mountains, to the vast Inca Empire. The Inca managed a massive, complex state, stretching for thousands of miles, with millions of people. How did they do it without a writing system like ours? They used specialized interpreters called Quipu cameos, trained for years to master this art. They were the empire's accountants, historians, and administrators. A quipu was a physical record of data. a tangible piece of information you could hold in your hands. Meanwhile, in North America, many indigenous nations, like the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Confederacy, used wampum belts. A designated keeper would hold the belt and recite the oral history associated with it, with the patterns on the belt guiding their narration. The belt and the story were inseparable. It was a system that combined a physical object with a trained human memory, ensuring that the spirit This brings us to one of the most powerful and misunderstood knowledge systems of all, purely oral tradition. In many cultures, from West Africa with its griots to the Pacific Islands with their navigators, knowledge was entrusted to people, not objects. But this wasn't just a game of telephone where the story changes with each telling. These were highly structured, disciplined systems. They learned epic poems, genealogies, and legal codes that could be hours or even days long. If a storyteller made a mistake during a public recital, others who knew the story would immediately correct them. This ensured the information remained stable and accurate across generations. The knowledge was alive, held in a collective memory. So, how did people remember so much without paper? Rituals and ceremonies weren't just symbolic. They were scheduled repetitions that reinforced key social and historical lessons year after year. Knowledge wasn't an abstract thing you looked up in a book. It was woven into the fabric of daily life, into the cycle of the seasons, and into the very ground you walked on. So why did Europeans so often dismiss these sophisticated systems? A big part of it was a simple but powerful bias. No books equals no history. This wasn't just a passive misunderstanding, it was an active justification for conquest. By declaring these cultures as having no history, it made it easier to destroy their societies, seize their land, and erase their identity. Their knowledge wasn't disproven. It was deliberately ignored and destroyed. Thankfully, our understanding is changing. Modern fields like anthropology, linguistics, and even cognitive science are helping us appreciate the genius of these non-alphabetic systems. Ultimately, this challenges our very definition of intelligence. We've been taught for centuries that literacy, our kind of literacy's the ultimate measure of a person, S, or a culture, S, sophistication. They were different. They were holistic, communal, and deeply connected to the physical world. To judge them by the standards of a book-based culture is to miss their true brilliance entirely. And there's a final, profound lesson here. When knowledge is stored in books, you can burn the library. But when knowledge lives inside people, when it's woven into the community and embedded in the landscape, you can't destroy it so easily. To erase that history, you have to silence the people themselves. And that's a history we must never forget. Thanks so much for watching. If this made you think differently about history and knowledge, consider subscribing for more deep dives. See you next time.